Reporting season is always interesting because you're looking back rather than forward, generally speaking. I think looking back, what we had is that lockdowns clearly affected the retailers very hard in the first 3 months, 3.5 months of the year. But when they came to an end in the middle of October, we saw a really good bounce in retail sales. So Australia-wide, retail sales were up 5.2% in October and 5.8% in November, so really strong numbers. Now, I think the emergence of Omicron towards the end of the period is certainly going to take the edge off it for a few retailers, including Accent, which I'll just touch on in a second. But generally speaking, all of this bad news was in people's expectations and in the share price before. So while we should expect to see sales and margins will be down significantly for almost everyone that we cover, it won't necessarily be worse than people expected. What I think might be worse is the current trading statements that people make, because clearly, normally what happens is you give a trading statement for the first 6 or 7 weeks of the period, and those first 6 or 7 weeks are going to be reasonably heavily affected by Omicron. So if you have a largely in-store business, you're going to see the effects of reduced footfall. And that's really unavoidable. Now, if you've got a strong online business, then that's fantastic. You're going to be in a situation where you've got a nice buffer. Because clearly online sales tend to operate in contra to retail sales in store. As Timmy said, there's been a rash of unscheduled pre-announcements in my sector in the last few weeks. In fact, there's just been another one this morning. Now, these are generally been positive. So if you look at Beacon, if you look at JB Hi-Fi, if you look at Universal, these have generally been reasonably positive statements. And I think they've been putting these statements out because they want to say, look, there's a lot of hysteria about at the moment, but actually we haven't done so bad. And Beacon in particular, Beacon absolutely blew us away by their numbers. So despite the fact that they are overweight New South Wales and Victoria, and despite the fact that their stores were under lockdown for 3.5 months of the year of the period in those states, they were able to report earnings and sales in line with last year's record results. So some companies are doing a very, very good job. JB Hi-Fi similarly reported really strong sales resilience, certainly helped by their online business, and really good margins as well. So the theme of these pre-announcements has been sales have been pretty resilient and also margins have been pretty good. Even Universal said, look, there's been a lot of concern around discounting. Well, we haven't done it. There's been a lot of concern about supply chain and cost inflation. Well, that hasn't affected us so far. But there are some exceptions to the rule. So Adairs yesterday was less than positive, although I would want to reiterate that a lot of that was stock specific around their new national distribution centre and the frictions they've had with opening that up. And that's not necessarily something you can extrapolate across the board. Accent just now came out with a statement saying that their EBIT would be 30 to 31. We're at 38. Consensus is at 47. So a dramatic decline in EBIT, and they are blaming a drop-off in sales right at the end of the period, so the last week in December, due to Omicron. Now, curiously, Universal said that there was no effect on them in the last week in December from Omicron. So somebody's being economical with the truth. But nonetheless, we are going to see an abundance of caution. So despite the fact that I expect, generally speaking, the results to be as good, if not better than market expectations, no one's going to put their neck out and say, look, it's all good. Omicron is going to have an effect in January. That will affect current trading numbers. As we roll into the second half of the year, you have the resetting of hedges causing pressure on gross margins. You have supply chain cost inflation. You have potentially consumer spending starting to moderate. As well from the release of pent-up demand at the end of 2021. So I don't think that anyone's going to be getting carried away with the retail sector, if I'm honest. Just in terms of the beat and miss potentials, the best beat potential I would highlight is Baby Bunting. I think their margins are going to be pretty strong. In the first half of the year, their gross margins have been protected by their hedging policy and locking in freight costs. It's not to say it doesn't get worse in the second half, but for the first half, I think it's pretty good. And Australians have been pretty busy during lockdown, and we are in the midst of a little baby boom. So that will certainly help demand as well. My missed potential, which I was going to have the big reveal, was going to be Accent Group. Easy to say that now. It's honestly the truth. So I've had to think on my feet here, and my new missed potential is going to be the Reject Shop. The Reject Shop is predominantly a store-based business, so it doesn't have that buffer from online sales, but also very thin margins, which makes them very vulnerable to any sort of cost pressure. So Baby Bunting to beat, Reject Shop to miss, and my three best stocks for the next 12 months are Universal, Lovisa, and Beacon Lighting.